The morning sun was shining brightly over the city, casting long shadows on the busy sidewalk. It was a Tuesday, which meant the city was back to its usual rhythm after the weekend. Cars were honking, people were rushing to coffee shops, and the noise of life was everywhere. But for one young woman, the noise felt a little overwhelming. She stood outside a tall, glass building that housed one of the biggest banks in the city. She looked up at the building, taking a deep breath to calm her nerves. She was not like the other people rushing into the building. While everyone else wore gray suits, black coats, and serious faces, she was wearing a bright yellow cardigan with flowers on it. It was her favorite sweater because it made her feel happy. Her hair was pulled back neatly in 2 clips, and she had a small backpack on her shoulders. She clutched a piece of paper in her hand tightly, as if it were the most valuable treasure in the world inside her backpack. She had her wallet and her ID. She had checked everything 3 times before leaving her house that morning. This was a big day. It was a day for grown-ups. For a long time, things like banking and paying bills were done for her by her parents or her grandmother. But today she wanted to do it herself. She wanted to show everyone that she could be independent. The paper in her hand was a check. It was a gift from her grandmother for her birthday. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but to her, it meant the world. With this money, she planned to go to the department store down the street. She knew exactly what she wanted to buy, a pretty blue necklace that she had seen in the window weeks ago. She wanted to give it to her mother as a surprise gift because her mother loved blue. The thought of seeing her mother smile gave her the courage to push open the heavy glass door. As she walked into the bank, the atmosphere changed instantly. The air inside was cool and dry, filled with the smell of expensive cleaning products and old paper. It was quiet compared to the street outside. The only sounds were the hushed voices of people talking, the fast clicking of keyboards, and the heavy thud of a stamp being pressed onto paper. She walked slowly, her sneakers making a soft squeaking sound on the shiny marble floor. She felt very small in the large room. The ceiling was high and there were big chandeliers hanging down, casting a bright white light. To her left, there was a row of comfortable chairs where a few people sat waiting. To her right, against the far wall, was a long line of tellers sitting behind thick glass windows. She looked around and saw that everyone looked so serious. Men in suits were looking at their expensive wristwatches, checking the time. Women were tapping their fingers impatiently on their bags. Everyone seemed to be in a hurry to get somewhere important. She felt a knot form in her stomach. She tried to smile at a man walking past her, hoping to make a friend, but he didn't even look at her. He just walked right by, focused on his phone. She swallowed hard and joined the line of people waiting for the tellers. She was near the back, but she didn't mind waiting. She used the time to practice what she was going to say. In her head, she rehearsed the sentence over and over again. "Hello, I would like to cash this check, please." It sounded simple enough. She had practiced it in front of her mirror at home many times. But sometimes, when she got nervous, her words didn't come out the way she wanted them to. Sometimes they would get stuck, or she would speak a bit quietly. She hoped that wouldn't happen today. She wanted to be professional, just like the people in the suits. The line moved forward slowly. Step by step, she got closer to the glass counters. She watched the people in front of her. One man was depositing a stack of cash. Another woman was asking about a loan. They spoke confidently and loudly. The bank tellers typed quickly on their computers, barely looking up. The machines in the background made a whirring sound as they counted money. She looked down at her check. It was slightly crinkled now because she had been holding it so tight. She tried to smooth it out with her fingers. It was signed by her grandmother in messy handwriting. The thought of her grandmother made her feel a bit warmer. Her grandmother had told her, "You are smart and you are capable. You can do this." Finally, there was only one person in front of her. She could see the teller clearly now. It was a woman with bright red lipstick and a sharp uniform. The teller was typing aggressively on her keyboard and didn't look very happy. The person in front of her finished their business and walked away with a receipt. It was her turn. The young woman took a small step forward. Her legs felt a little shaky, like jelly. She could feel her heart beating faster against her chest. Thump, thump, thump. She reached the window and stood on her tiptoes just a little to see over the ledge. She placed the check on the counter and slid it through the small opening under the glass. The teller stopped typing. She looked down at the check, then up at the young woman in the yellow sweater. The teller didn't smile. She just raised her eyebrows as if she were surprised to see someone like her there. The young woman took a deep breath. She remembered her practice. She looked the teller in the eye and opened her mouth to speak. Hello, she started, her voice sounding a little shaky. I would like to cash this check, please. She stumbled a little on the words, but she got them out. She felt proud of that small victory. She stood there waiting, hoping the teller would nod and take the check. But the teller didn't move. Instead, the woman looked at the check, then back at the girl, and let out a loud sigh that the young woman could hear even through the thick glass. The friendly feeling she had tried to hold on to began to fade, replaced by a cold feeling of worry. Something told her this wasn't going to be as easy as she thought. The sigh that came from the other side of the glass was heavy and loud. It wasn't just a normal breath. It was a sound filled with annoyance. The teller, a woman with sharp features and perfectly styled hair, picked up the check using 2 fingers as if the piece of paper were something dirty that she didn't want to touch. She held it up to the light, squinting her eyes, and then typed a few numbers into her computer with aggressive, loud clacks on the keyboard. The young woman in the yellow sweater waited patiently. Her hands were gripping the edge of the marble counter so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She tried to smile again, hoping that a friendly face might make the teller nicer. She knew that sometimes people were in a rush and she wanted to be understanding. But the teller didn't look back at her. She just stared at her computer screen, her lips pressed into a thin, straight line. "This is an out-of-state check," the teller said suddenly. Her voice was flat and cold, not the warm voice she used with the man in the suit before. I know," the young woman answered softly. She leaned in a little closer to the small microphone on the glass. My grandmother sent it. It is for my birthday." The teller didn't say anything about the birthday. She didn't say happy birthday or even nod politely. Instead, she looked over the young woman's shoulder at the long line of people forming behind her. "And you don't have an account with us?" she asked, raising her voice slightly. "No, ma'am," she shook her head. I just want to cash it, please." The teller let out another huff of air. She turned her head away from the window and shouted, not using the phone, but just yelling across the room to a man sitting at a desk in the corner. "Hey, I need an override code for this." "It's a non-customer check." The man in the corner looked up. He was wearing a suit that looked more expensive than the car the young woman's father drove. He had a gold pen tucked into his pocket and a name tag that said, "Manager." When he heard the shout, he looked annoyed that his paperwork had been interrupted. He stood up slowly, smoothing his tie, and walked over with an attitude that screamed he was much too important to be dealing with this as he walked behind the counter. The teller pointed a manicured finger at the young woman. "She wants to cash this," the teller whispered, but the glass wasn't soundproof, and the young woman could hear her. "It's tiny. I don't know why she doesn't just go to her own bank." The manager arrived at the window and looked at the check. He didn't look at the girl. He just looked at the numbers. "Is everything verified?" he asked the teller. "Yeah, but I'm not wasting a voucher on this small amount," the teller said. Rolling her eyes so far back that only the whites were visible, the manager chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. He looked at the young woman finally, but not with kindness. He looked at her the way someone looks at a fly that has landed on their food. "Miss," he said, his voice stern, "we have a lot of important business to do here today. This amount is very small. It's going to take us longer to process the paperwork than it is worth for you." The young woman felt her face get hot. A red flush started creeping up her neck. She didn't understand why that mattered. Money was money, wasn't it? I'm sorry," she stammered. "I just really need the cash. I want to buy a good gift." "Gift?" The teller laughed, a short, sharp bark of laughter. She looked at the manager. "She's going to buy a gift." The manager shook his head, looking down at his shoes. "Listen," he said, turning his back to her for a moment to talk to the teller. "This is going to take forever. I have clients waiting." By now, the people in the line behind her were starting to grumble. A man in a gray coat tapped his foot loudly on the floor. "Can we hurry this up?" he muttered to the air. "Some of us have jobs to get to." The young woman heard them. Every word felt like a little pinch. She squeezed her hands together until they hurt. She wanted to turn around and say she was sorry, that she didn't mean to be a bother, but her throat felt tight, like she had swallowed a stone. She looked back at the teller with wide, watery eyes. Please? Can you help me?" The teller looked at the manager and smirked. She didn't try to hide it this time. "I think she's confused," the teller said loud enough for the next few people in line to hear. "Maybe she doesn't understand how a bank works." Another teller, a younger man standing 2 windows down, heard the comment. He leaned over to see what was happening. When he saw the young woman in the bright yellow sweater, standing there looking nervous and vulnerable, he didn't offer to help. Instead, he put his hand over his mouth and laughed. "What's so funny?" the younger teller whispered, but the microphone picked it up. "Nothing," the first teller said, waving a hand dismissively. "Just that she thinks we have all day to wait for her to count out $10. It wasn't $10. It was 50, but the young woman didn't correct her. She felt frozen. She looked from the teller to the manager, hoping someone would step in and tell them to stop. But the manager just checked his expensive watch and sighed again. "Look," the manager said, leaning into the microphone. "Maybe you should come back another time? Or go to the grocery store. They might cash it there. We are very busy right now." But I am here now," the young woman whispered. A single tear escaped her eye and rolled down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away with her sleeve, but it was too late. They had seen it. The first teller made a face, mimicking a pouting lip. "Oh no, she's crying," she whispered to the other teller. They both chuckled. It was a cruel sound, the kind of laugh that makes you feel small and invisible. They weren't laughing because something was funny. They were laughing because they thought they were better than her. They were enjoying their power. The young woman looked down at her sneakers. She wished the floor would just open up and swallow her. She felt her shoulders shaking. She just wanted to go home. She just wanted to be invisible. The check was still sitting on the counter under the glass, rejected and unwanted. She felt stupid for thinking she could do this. She felt stupid for wearing her yellow sweater. She felt stupid for being born the way she was. The noise in the bank seemed to get louder. The typing sounded like hammering. The whispers sounded like shouting. She felt dizzy. She reached out a trembling hand to take her check back, but the teller didn't push it out. Instead, the teller held up a finger, signaling wait, while she continued to gossip and laugh with her coworker. They were ignoring her on purpose, enjoying her embarrassment. In the middle of the room, standing near a large pillar, a man in a leather jacket and a baseball cap had stopped looking at his phone. He had been watching this whole scene play out. At first, he was just waiting in line like everyone else, his head down, keeping to himself. But now, he was standing completely still. He wasn't looking at his phone anymore. His dark eyes were fixed on the tellers behind the counter. The easygoing look he usually had on his face was gone. His jaw was set tight and a muscle in his cheek twitched. He watched the young woman wipe her eyes and watched the tellers laugh. He didn't like what he was seeing. Not one bit. The air in the bank had grown heavy and uncomfortable. It felt thick, like the air before a big thunderstorm, but instead of rain clouds, the darkness was coming from the cruelty of the people behind the counter. The young woman in the yellow sweater was still standing at the window, her head hanging low. She was trying her best not to make any noise as she cried, but small sniffles were escaping her. Every time she sniffled, the teller behind the glass would let out another annoyed sound or exchange a nasty look with the manager. The other people in the line were shifting their weight uncomfortably. Some were looking at their phones, pretending they didn't see anything. Others were looking at the floor. It is a strange thing about human nature. Often when we see something bad happening, we are too afraid to step in. We think, It's not my business, or I don't want to cause a scene. So, the room stayed noisy with the sound of typing and shuffling feet. But the silence of the people who should have helped was deafening. However, there was one person near the back of the line who refused to look away. He was standing by a large marble pillar, half hidden in the shadow. He was a man who looked like he didn't want to be noticed. He wore a worn-out leather jacket that had seen better days and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He had a small, gray backpack on one shoulder and held a wrinkled deposit slip in his hand. To anyone walking by, he looked like just another regular guy trying to get his errands done before going home, but this man was not just walking away. He had been watching the scene from the very beginning. At first he thought maybe it was just a normal bank delay. He thought perhaps the system was slow. But when he saw the teller roll her eyes and heard the mean whispers, his stomach tightened. He saw the manager turn his back on the crying woman, and he saw the other teller laughing behind his hand. Something inside the man shifted. He didn't like bullies. He never had. In his life, he had seen many people try to push others around just because they could. It made him angry. It made a fire burn in his chest. He looked at the young woman in the yellow sweater and saw himself, or perhaps someone he used to know. He saw a person who was trying her best, who was full of kindness, but was being treated like she didn't matter. The man took a slow, deep breath. He adjusted the strap of his bag. He looked at the deposit slip in his hand, then back at the crying girl. He realized that his errand didn't matter anymore. Being on time didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was stopping the meanness happening 10 feet away from him. He took a step out of the line. It was a small step, but it was decisive. The soft rubber sole of his sneaker squeaked against the polished floor. A businessman standing nearby glanced at him, surprised that someone was leaving the orderly queue. The businessman looked at the man's face and quickly looked away. Even with the cap pulled down, there was something intense in the man's eyes now. The look of calm relaxation was gone, replaced by a look of focused determination. As he walked toward the counter, his pace was steady. He wasn't running and he wasn't stomping. He moved with a quiet strength, like a lion walking through tall grass. He passed the people who were too scared to speak up. He passed the security guard who was busy looking at his own phone in the corner. The man kept his eyes fixed on the girl in the yellow sweater. The tellers were still giggling among themselves. The manager was checking his watch again, counting the seconds until he could get back to his office. They had no idea that the mood in the room was about to change. They were so wrapped up in their own little world of power that they didn't see the man approach. He stopped right next to the young woman. He was close enough that she could smell the faint scent of leather and fresh air from outside. The young woman felt a presence beside her. She thought it was another angry customer wanting her to move. She squeezed her eyes shut tighter, waiting to be yelled at or told to leave, but the man didn't yell. He didn't tap his foot. He just stood there. He was a solid, calm wall next to her. He didn't look at the manager or the tellers yet. He stood silently for a moment, letting his presence settle. It was a strange thing. Without saying a word, the man made the air around him feel heavy with seriousness. The people behind the counter stopped giggling, not because they wanted to, but because they felt a change in the atmosphere. The man slowly reached into his pocket and took out a pair of dark sunglasses. He folded them carefully and tucked them into his jacket. Then he turned his head. He looked through the thick glass, straight at the teller who had been laughing. His gaze was sharp. It wasn't a look of hatred, but a look of deep disappointment. It was the kind of look that makes you feel ashamed of yourself without a single word being spoken. The teller's smile froze on her face. She looked at the man standing there. He wasn't wearing a suit like the other important people. He wasn't holding a briefcase. He was just a guy in a leather jacket. But he stood with such confidence and authority that she felt small. She stopped typing. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. The manager, sensing that something had changed, finally turned around fully. He looked at the man, then down at the young woman, then back at the man. He opened his mouth to say something, probably to tell the man to get back in line, but the words died in his throat. The man in the cap didn't look like someone who wanted to argue. He looked like someone who was there to set things right. The man gently shifted his weight, Placing his boots firmly on the floor, he folded his arms across his chest. He was no longer the quiet observer. He was now a participant. The silence that had been uncomfortable before was now absolute. The only sound in the huge, echoing bank was the quiet sniffling of the young woman. The man leaned in slightly, getting the teller's full attention. He didn't look at the check. He didn't look at the money. He looked at the teller's eyes. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Every person in the line was watching now. The tension was pulled tight like a rubber band ready to snap. Everyone knew something was about to happen. The man was about to speak, and by the look on his face, he wasn't going to whisper. The silence that filled the bank was absolute, like the air inside a library, but it was not peaceful. It was a waiting silence. The man in the leather jacket stood firmly next to the young woman in the yellow sweater. He looked at the teller, and his eyes were dark and serious. He didn't blink. He didn't smile. He just stood there, a strong presence in a room that had suddenly become very cold. Finally, he spoke. His voice wasn't loud. He didn't yell or shout. In fact, his voice was quite low, soft, and deep. But somehow, it cut through the noise of the air conditioning and the typing like a knife. It was a voice that commanded attention. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. The question was simple. It was the kind of question you ask when you want to know what is going on. But the way he said it made it clear that he already knew the answer. He wasn't asking for information. He was asking for accountability. The teller with the red lipstick blinked rapidly. She looked from the man to the manager, her confidence melting away like ice in the hot sun. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. We were just," she stammered, her voice wavering. "This is a complicated transaction, sir, and we are very busy." The man didn't look at the check. He didn't look at the computer. He kept his eyes locked on the teller's face. He shook his head slowly, just one small movement from side to side. "No," he said calmly. "That isn't true. You aren't busy. You are being rude." A gasp went through the line of people behind him. Nobody ever spoke to bank staff like that, especially not in this part of town where everyone acted like they were better than everyone else. The manager stepped forward, puffing out his chest. He adjusted his tie and tried to look powerful. "Sir," the manager said, his voice tight and angry, "I am the manager here. This does not concern you. Please get back in line or I will have to ask you to leave." The man didn't move an inch. He didn't even look at the manager. He just reached into his pocket, pulled out a pair of dark sunglasses, and slowly unfolded them. He put them on, hiding his eyes, but he didn't need eyes to make them feel small. He turned his head slightly toward the manager. "I'm not going anywhere," the man said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming even quieter and more dangerous. "And you should stop talking. You should listen instead." He pointed a finger at the young woman, who was still wiping tears from her cheeks. She was shaking, but now she wasn't shaking just from fear. She was shaking because she couldn't believe someone was standing up for her. "This young lady came in here to do business?" the man said, speaking slowly so every word would sink in. "She was polite. She was patient. And you—" He paused, turning back to the teller. "You laughed at her. You made fun of her. You made her cry." The teller's face turned bright red. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet his gaze. I didn't mean," she whispered. "Yes, you did," the man said firmly. He wasn't angry in a hot, explosive way. He was angry in a way that felt like heavy judgment. "You did it because you thought it was funny. You did it because you thought she wouldn't understand. But she understands. She understands disrespect perfectly." The room was completely frozen now. The security guard in the corner had put his phone away and was walking slowly over, his hand on his belt, but he stopped when he saw the intensity of the situation. The people in the line were watching with their mouths open. Some of them were recording with their phones. They knew they were witnessing something rare. They were seeing a bully being put in their place without a single punch being thrown. The manager tried again, sweating now. "Sir, please, this is a bank. We have strict procedures. Forget your procedures, the man snapped, cutting him off. The sharpness of his tone made the manager jump. We are talking about basic human decency. Do you know what that is? It means treating people with kindness, no matter who they are. It means helping someone when they are struggling, not laughing at them. He leaned closer to the glass, close enough that his breath almost fogged it up. I watched you for 5 minutes, he said to the teller. I watched you ignore her. I watched you whisper. I watched you hurt her feelings just so you could have a laugh with your friend. He gestured to the young woman beside him. She is a human being. She has a heart. She has feelings. She matters. Maybe more than you, because she came here with kindness, and you came here with arrogance. The words hung in the air. The teller looked like she was about to cry. The shame was written all over her face. The manager had gone pale. He realized that the other customers were glaring at him now. He had lost control of the room. Now, the man said, standing up straight and crossing his arms again, we are going to fix this. You are going to stop what you are doing. You are going to take her check, and you are going to cash it. You are not going to sigh. You are not going to roll your eyes. And you are going to do it right now? He took a step closer to the glass. And then you are going to apologize to her? Not to me, to her. And you are going to make it sound like you mean it? Or I am going to stand right here until you close this branch, and I will tell every single person who walks through that door exactly how you treat your customers. The teller didn't say a word. She didn't dare. She nodded quickly, terrified. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, typing faster than she had ever typed in her life. The manager opened his mouth to argue one last time, but one look from the man in the leather jacket made him shut it. He stepped back, defeated. The power had completely shifted. The man in the cap wasn't a customer anymore. He was the boss, and everyone knew it. The sound of the keyboard typing was frantic now, loud and erratic. The teller who had been so cruel just moments ago was working as fast as her fingers would allow. Her face was no longer filled with smugness. Instead, it was pale and sweaty. She didn't dare look up at the man standing next to the young woman. She kept her eyes glued to the screen, terrified that if she made eye contact, he would say something else. The young woman in the yellow sweater stood quietly, her breathing still a little shaky. She watched the numbers on the teller's screen change. She felt a gentle tap on her shoulder and looked up. The man in the leather jacket was looking down at her. Even with his dark sunglasses on, she could feel the warmth coming from him. He gave her a small, encouraging nod. It was a tiny movement, but it felt like a shield protecting her from the meanness of the room. Finally, the printer buzzed and a receipt shot out. The teller grabbed it along with a stack of cash. She counted it twice, her hands trembling slightly, and then pushed it through the slot under the glass. She didn't say have a nice day. She didn't say anything. She just wanted the interaction to be over, but the man didn't move. He didn't reach for the money. He stayed standing exactly where he was, blocking the teller's view of anything else. Aren't you forgetting something? He asked quietly. The teller froze. She looked at the manager, who was standing nearby, looking like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. The manager cleared his throat awkwardly. Yes, the manager stammered. He leaned into the microphone, his voice lacking all the confidence it had earlier. We apologize for the inconvenience, miss, really. The man shook his head slowly. Not for the inconvenience, he corrected, his voice firm. For the disrespect. Apologize for how you made her feel. And look at her when you say it. The teller took a deep, shaky breath. She finally lifted her eyes and looked at the young woman. This time she didn't see a joke. She saw a person. She saw the red eyes from crying and the trembling hands. The weight of what she had done suddenly crashed down on her. It wasn't just a fun little moment of gossip anymore. It was real, and it had hurt a real human being. I'm very sorry, the teller whispered. Her voice cracked. I was rude. I shouldn't have laughed. Please forgive me. The manager chimed in quickly, his voice humble. We are very sorry. You didn't deserve that. It was wrong of us." The young woman looked at them. She saw that they really were sorry. The anger and the superiority had vanished, replaced by shame. She looked at the man beside her. He gave her a tiny smile, as if to say, "It's okay if you accept it, or it's okay if you don't. You have the power now." She took a deep breath and nodded her head. "Thank you," she said softly. It was a simple forgiveness, but it felt big. It showed she was better than they were. The man turned back to the counter. He looked at the manager and the teller one last time. "Remember this feeling," he said quietly. "Remember how it feels to be small. The next time someone comes in here who needs a little extra time or a little extra patience, I want you to think of today. You work in a bank. Your job is to serve people, not to judge them." With that, he gestured for the young woman to take her money. She reached out and took the cash and the receipt. She held it tight in her hand. It was still the same money, but it felt different now. It didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a victory. The man put a hand gently on her back, guiding her away from the counter. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you out of here." They walked away from the counter together. The line of customers who had been watching silently parted to let them through. No one was tapping their feet anymore. No one was looking at their phones. Many people were smiling at the young woman, offering her looks of support and admiration. The security guard standing by the pillar actually took his hat off and nodded at the man as they passed. It was a silent sign of respect. As they reached the big glass doors, the man paused. He looked back at the bank staff one last time. The teller and the manager were standing frozen, staring after them. The man didn't say anything else, but his message was clear. The room was indeed frozen, but not with fear anymore. It was frozen with the realization that kindness matters, and that bad behavior has consequences. He pushed the heavy door open for her. "You did great," he said, his voice kind and fatherly. "You were very brave." The young woman looked up at him, her eyes shining with happy tears now. "Thank you," she whispered. You saved me." He shook his head, a modest smile playing on his lips. "No," he said. "You just needed someone to stand by you. You did all the hard work." They walked out into the bright sunlight. The city noise rushed back to them, honking cars, talking people, the sound of life. But it didn't feel overwhelming anymore. It felt warm and friendly. The young woman took a deep breath of fresh air. She looked at her money, then at the department store down the street. She was going to get that blue necklace for her mother. She was going to walk in there with her head held high. The man in the leather jacket watched her for a moment, making sure she was okay. She looked back at him and waved. He waved back, then pulled his cap down low and turned to walk down the street. He didn't wait for a thank you from the bank staff, and he didn't wait for applause. He just disappeared into the crowd, becoming a regular guy again. Inside the bank, the silence stretched on for a long time. The teller sat down slowly in her chair. She looked at the empty spot in front of her window where the young woman had stood. She looked at her hands. She didn't say anything to the manager, and the manager didn't say anything to her. But for the rest of the day, every time a customer walked up to the window, she smiled. It wasn't a fake smile, and it wasn't a smirk. It was a real, genuine smile. She never rolled her eyes again. She had learned a lesson that day, taught by a stranger in a leather jacket and a brave girl in a yellow sweater. It was a lesson about dignity, kindness, and the importance of treating every single person with the respect they deserve.